Daniel chapter 6. And you have it in the NIV, I believe. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man, Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God." So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed." So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows were open toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. "Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den?" The king answered, "The decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed." Then they said to the king, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day." When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, "Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he has shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I done any wrong before you, your majesty." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. Before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. They must have been hungry, even though they didn't touch Daniel. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Great chapter. Okay, so last time we talked about the wisdom of Daniel. Today we're going to talk about living circumspectly and how Daniel actually lived, how he actually dealt with, frankly, the unjust laws of his kingdom. And maybe we can get some help as well for how we live in our world. So in the handout on page 1, the King James says, New King James, the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel. They could find no charge or fault because he was faithful. We shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning his law, the law of his God. So this word charge is actually used of a legal indictment as well as of a pretext. We're just going to find something that we can do for this guy. To get. That's the point. They're just looking for just a legal indictment, a pretext to make it up, a hoax. That's what they're going to do here. Art Scroll translate this as they tried to find a libel. They wanted to find fault. They wanted to find a flaw in Daniel's conduct of the government, like acceptance of bribes or misappropriation of public funds. But no matter how hard they searched, they could find nothing of this sort because he was faithful. Bottom of the page. It is remarkable that Daniel's accusers could find nothing to accuse him of except for his faith. He wasn't corrupt. He couldn't be bribed. He wasn't negligent. He wasn't making mistakes. He lived a circumspect life. Page 2. We are called to live circumspectly. Paul wrote in Ephesians 5, see then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise. That's Daniel. Redeeming the time because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is, and do not be drunk with wine, in which is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit. Circumspectly, the Greek word there in Ephesians 5 means perfect or exact. So dictionary.com defines the word circumspect, the English word, as in a careful or in a prudent way. When I think of this word circumspectly, my mind goes to the word circumference, as in like the outer parts of the boundary, the circular area, the perimeter, to live circumspectly. And I think, when I think of this word, I always think about Air Force pilots who, as they're flying and they're doing the loopity-loops and all the stuff that they have to do as they do that, they have to have this great situational awareness. It has to be beyond what you're feeling. It has to be, you have to be aware of everything going on around you. That's what it means to live circumspectly. This Greek adjective appears 9 times. I gave you all of the places where the verses where the word actually appears, like in Matthew 2. It means to be careful. In Luke 1, to be perfect. In Acts 18, to be accurate. Those are the places where the word appears. The other places besides Ephesians 5. So the question now is, do we live circumspectly? Or do we give cause for people to accuse us? That's the question. Why are they accusing Daniel at all? Perhaps it's professional jealousy. I mean, he's the head dude, and they're going to make him the head over the top 3. They're going to make him number 1. Perhaps they want to use their office for personal gain. Daniel's integrity stood in the way because he's not corrupt. Perhaps it's just common human pride. Perhaps, the commentaries say, it's like the word biblical commentary says, perhaps it's a matter of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is certainly a concern in this era, as evidenced by the book of Esther, which the story of the book of Esther is just 100 years later under the rule of King Xerxes of the Persian Empire. So it's the same era, the same region, and anti-Semitism was alive and well in this part of the world during this era. So it is certainly a possibility. On page 3. It says the governors and the satraps thronged before the king, and they said to him, Darius, live forever. The word thronged means to gather in a tumultuous throng. The NIV, they went as a group to the king. Sonsino says they came tumultuously. And there's, imagine this loud crowd, the ruckus, as they all come in this loud, mosh pit almost, as they're standing before the king and yelling their stuff. They enter his presence as one. No doubt their unity helps to persuade King Darius. Darius does not come across as a leader in the story. You have to wonder, how could he have missed Daniel's presence? It doesn't seem to fit. After all, Daniel is his right-hand man. Maybe Darius thought, surely, my friend Daniel wouldn't be the only one opposed to this idea. These guys are promoting me, and I promoted Daniel to his position. So Daniel must be my supporter. That could be what he's thinking. So they consulted together in verse 6, and they said, let's establish a royal statute. The Rashi, who's probably the most famous Bible commentator in Jewish history, and Rashi says that what's happening here is they are trying to maintain the king's law by force, explaining that as Darius was a foreigner and a new person to the throne, his position required some strengthening. Hey, you're the new guy here. You need to take some steps to make sure that your throne is well established. So he's going right with them. So so the petition, or the what they're talking him into, is whoever petitions any god or any man for 30 days except for you. So in verse 7, the worship of a human being, especially after his death, is not unknown in ancient times. In Persia, the king was seen as a manifestation or as a representation of a god. That is different from Egypt, where Pharaoh, the king, was seen as a god. But since the Persians saw the king as a representation of a god, they would bow before him as though he were God. They knew that he was not, but they would bow before him. So this is a really interesting quote here. The state characteristically assumes it has quasi-divine significance. One can see this propensity in the Marxist state and in its opposition to religion, which invites people to accept a higher commitment than that to the state. It can be as real as, if more subtle, in a Christian democracy. One can see it in the ancient monarchies' inclination to claim varying forms of sacral significance. So as I'm reading this paragraph, honestly, what I'm thinking of is January 6th. And the reason why I'm thinking of that is the way that for political gain, and I'm not saying it's okay to violate anything, but look what happened on that day. How many politicians talked about the sacred ground of the Capitol? But it's not sacred. The people's house. I'm not saying that violating it is okay. It's not okay. But I was bothered by the whole thing because I'm thinking to myself, what about the guy or the lady who had a business that was burned to the ground? Was that not sacred to them? Was that not the people's house? Using politics for the sake of power and referring to this as though this is the sacred ground, raising the status of government to the status of holiness. Does that make sense? It just bothered me. I'm not in any way excusing any kind of violation, not at all, not excusing it at all. Any violations, I get it. But what gets me is that double standard. That's what gets me. If I had a business and it was burned to the ground, and when the state begins to say, we are sacred, we're on a slippery slope. In Daniel chapter 6, the Persians had a lion's den. The word den is a pit. So the lion's den was a pit. The word is used to describe an underground cistern. So it was used to store water, or it was also used as a prison. Going over to page 4. The Persian kings enforced death penalties, which have been described, and this is a quote now, as almost exquisitely horrible forms of execution. Exquisitely horrible. Okay. Hence the phrase, may he die the death of 1,000 camels. Or humorously, may the fleas of 1,000 camels infest your armpits. It's just part of the culture. It was just, that kind of, they were just, people don't realize, they think the Romans invented crucifixion. No, it was actually the Persians. That it was, it's actually earlier than the Romans. So in Daniel chapter 6, the state is requiring obedience to its law rather than to God's law. Now, the state is not wrong to require obedience to its law. It is not wrong to do that. That is true. That is important. It's that there are 7 Noahide laws, 7 laws that Judaism recognizes that existed before the law of Moses was given. And one of them is that God required humanity to make courts of justice, to establish laws. And so I'm not saying in any way it's wrong to have laws, and I'm not suggesting it's wrong to require obedience to the laws. Not at all. Okay? So the state in chapter 6 is requiring obedience to its law rather than to God's law. Now, this dilemma has faced saints throughout the ages. It used to be that we Americans could see the obvious intrusion into the lives of Christians who live in communistic countries during COVID. There were cases where churches, especially in California, were forbidden from meeting while bars were allowed to stay open. There's something double standard there. Something's wrong there. For the past 70 years, the United States has been on a slippery rope towards the limiting of religious freedoms. This chapter goes right here. Like, how can I be honest to the chapter and not go here? The slippery road can actually be traced to the Johnson Amendment. A lot of what I'm about to say here now, there's an excellent video by Wall Builders, and I understand that what you can do is put your phone over that, if you have an iPhone, over that link, and you can touch the link, and it'll take you right to and you can order that video. That video is, I haven't watched it in at least 10 years, but I probably watched it 10 times. Okay, and it's an excellent video, and I discovered when I went to get the link that they have a transcript. I did not get the transcript. It's a whole lot cheaper than the video, but they're both inexpensive. They're both by Wall Builders. You'll remember David Barton has been here at the in the service, typically on July 4th weekend, and now his son has been coming. But that's a David Barton video. I did get to go on one of his Capitol tours of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., and it was remarkable. But that video is just really, really, really good. So, the Johnson Amendment. It's a provision that was added to the tax code in 1954. And it prohibits all 501c3 nonprofit organizations from endorsing or opposing political candidates. The amendment is named after Senator Lyndon Baines Johnson, who introduced it to Congress and eventually became president. The amendment first became controversial during President Reagan's administration. And then it became, and I actually wrote papers about that particular amendment when I was back in working on my bachelor's degree, because for me it was so obvious. But on May 4th, 2017, President Trump made this an issue of his politics, and he signed what is called the Presidential Executive Order Promoting Free Speech and Religious Liberty. Contrary to what many people think, Trump's executive order did not repeal the Johnson Amendment. It did not allow ministers to endorse politicians from the pulpit, but it forbade the Department of Treasury from enforcing the Johnson Amendment where secular organizations would not similarly be restricted. There's no doubt that his stated purpose for the amendment was to ease the restrictions of the Johnson Amendment on churches. That's what he did. That was the reason he did it. By the way, as I'm thinking about living circumspect and not giving fault or opportunity for people to find fault against us, I think Trump is really a really good example of a person that did not do that well. He does not do this well. I mean, you're hearing things that, you're going to say he like he does a lot his policies, but he certainly gives opportunity for people to accuse him. Right? No matter what you think of his policies. I mean, I don't know of anybody who's better at giving opportunity. Anybody who's better at giving opportunity for people to accuse you, no matter what his policies are. So he does not live a circumspect life. His policies are a whole different, you know what I mean? That I can defend most of his policies, right? But he's not, he's great at giving opportunity for, why'd you have to say that, Do you realize what you just did? So anyway, going over to page 5. After 1954, the Supreme Court created, that is the word, the separation of church and state in 1962. This marked a significant increase in growing restrictions on religious liberty. That video that I told you, America's Godly Heritage, just explains this really well. Notably, this is actually the first time the Supreme Court ruled without citing a single historical precedent. They literally were no precedents. They rewrote history and created something out of nothing. There were no precedents that they could cite when they established the separation of church and state. It's crazy. But that's you can get that right from that video. In fact, I did do this. I didn't add it to the video, but I got it on my phone before. Listen to the first Bill of Rights. Bill of Rights, here we go. First Amendment. And this is the First Amendment, okay? This is what the Constitution actually says, okay? Congress shall make no law establishing, respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Congress is restricted. Congress can't do anything. It doesn't restrict religion. It restricts Congress, okay? It does not restrict the state. The 13 states, most people don't know this, all had official religions, every one of them. For example, do you know why Maryland is called Maryland? Mary. It was the only state that was officially Catholic. I don't know what they all were, the different religions. I don't know. But the only state that was Catholic, you're asking if Virginia was the Mary Virgin. I don't know. I don't know. But I do know Maryland was the only Catholic state, and the name Maryland was an announcement of that. So the Constitution gives nothing about the freedom of the states with regard to religion. It gives no ability of government to restrict anyone from practicing their religion. In 1962, the Supreme Court established this. Okay? But the first Bill of Rights is only talking about the federal government. Congress shall make no law, because the Bill of Rights are from the beginning of the country, right? You understand that. Okay? Shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. I remember this would have been 1983 to 1985, because I remember where we were living in the military. And I heard Pat Robertson explain this. His father was a senator. And as he explained it back then, was the mark of a gentleman in the early days of America was his ability to discuss religion and politics in the public arena. That was the mark of a gentleman. Isn't that remarkable? So the idea that, and he went on to explain that originally what these, and the way that there was reason to believe that all of the parts of the First Amendment were actually somehow connected to the thing that is mentioned first, which is freedom of religion. So in other words, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech. I don't know that he's right. I'm not a lawyer. But when he said abridging the freedom of speech, what Pat Robertson said was the freedom of speech it is referring to is freedom of speech with regard to religion. That you should be able to say what you believe. Okay. What good is religion if you can't say what you believe? Right? And then it said, or of the press, so you should be able to publish your documents, right? Or the right of the people to assemble peacefully. That was what he said. I'm not a lawyer. I know we have lawyers in the room, and you can speak far more intelligently than I can to any of this. But in 1958, the Supreme Court actually warned that if we don't quit talking about the separation of church and state so much, the American people are going to begin to think that it was part of the Constitution. That quote is in that video, like the actual source. The Ten Commandments then were removed from the schools by the Supreme Court in 1980. It was a 5-4 opinion. There were no briefing or oral arguments. The court expressed concern. The court feared that students might actually read the Constitution and obey it. In 2005, the court ruled in a 5-4 decision that displays of the Ten Commandments on government property, such as in Texas state capitol and Kentucky courthouses, were constitutional so long as they had legitimate secular purpose. Now, what bothers me, if I can be honest here, this is the best way to be, right, is that makes the secular the standard. Okay, I understand it, but it does concern me. So secular rules. Going down the page a little bit. The law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. The Bible records another instance of immutability of the laws of the Medes and the Persians in the book of Esther. Classical writers also refer to that. The Jewish Study Bible, which is, of course, a really good Bible, but it is often liberal. It's often plays down on the actual miraculous, to be frank. I like it a lot. I like the Bible a lot. I like the notes a lot, but I'm aware of that. It's I love the Bible. Some ancient authors, according to it, believe that the law of the Persian king, once enacted, could not be altered. This is likely only a popular tradition. However, it is emphasized for dramatic effect. Let's contrast the law of the Medes and the Persians with the law of God. The law of God will stand firm until beyond creation itself. In Matthew 24, verse 35, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. Creation's going to go away, but the word of God will not. top of page 6. We see that heaven and earth pass away. Revelation chapter 20, verse 11, I saw a great white throne, and him who sat on it, from whose face the earth and heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. So heaven and earth do go away, just like Jesus said. Revelation 21:1, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there's no more sea. But the law remains. Now, replacement theology, and everybody who comes here is going to be interested in this whole issue of replacement theology, okay, which basically says that the law of Moses has been replaced by the New Testament. Okay, well, replacement theology teaches that the law of Moses will pass away. But did Jesus actually teach that? Let's look at it. In Matthew 5, do not think that I've come to destroy the law of the prophets. I did not come to destroy. I did not come to overthrow, is the Greek word for destroy. I did not come to throw down, Theological Dictionary of the New Testament. I did not come to invalidate, but to fulfill. The word fulfill means to fill up, to cause to abound, to furnish, to supply liberally, to fill up to the brim. That's the difference. So in other words, it doesn't mean like to fulfill as in like I've done away with it, because if you do that, then you're destroying it. What he's actually going to do is he's actually going to give the actual real reason. See, he is the Word of God. So what he does, it's really an amazingly beautiful thing. In the Sermon on the Mount, and we're going to go through, we'll just go through these in a moment, he will actually go through all of these things right out of Moses, and then he'll give the real meaning of it. And why does he do it that way? Because he's essentially saying, I was the one that gave the law to Moses. I'm the one. And so Matthew 5, 6, and 7 is the Sermon on the Mount. And he quotes these laws from Moses. And he says, let me give you what it really means. I'm going to fill it out. I'm going to show you the real meaning. And I'll go through them with you in a moment. I'm going to show you what it really means. And then you hit Matthew, after the Sermon on the Mount, which ends in Matthew 7. In Matthew 8 and 9, you have 10 miracles in a row. And what he actually does, I wish I'd put them in the handout. What he actually does is, why does Matthew record 10 miracles in a row? He's proving that he has the authority to tell you what the meaning of the Ten Commandments actually is. He proves it by doing these 10 miracles right after he actually says, this is what the law says, but let me tell you what it really means. And I know, because I'm the one that gave them. Now, if you go, and many of you will do this now, you're going to go back and you're going to want to count them up. And this is how, so when you go to Matthew 8 and 9, and this is how to realize, to help you count it, because I went through this. In Matthew 8 and 9, you'll see things like, for example, if he heals 2 blind men, that is one miracle, right? Because there are 2 there, and he heals them. Or the day that he heals Peter's mother-in-law, and then that evening they bring to him many that are sick, and he heals them all. You might make the mistake of counting that as 2, but it's 1 because they're all at Peter's house. It's the miracles at Peter's house, right? This is not even original with me. I discovered this reading Word Biblical Commentary, which is a Gentile commentary, very conservative, about the book of Matthew, and he points out there's just 10 miracles. So that's what he does. So do not think in Matthew 5, I've come to destroy the law of the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly, I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, not one jot, not one tittle will by any means from the law pass from the law till all is fulfilled, till everything. Well, you know, as far as I can tell, the earth is still here. I mean, I've never seen heaven, but I have seen the earth, and it's still here. Okay? Whoever therefore breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men. So now Matthew is a book written to Jewish people. So Jews have a much closer connection to what is required of Torah than what Gentiles have. Gentiles have basically 4 things that are required of them, according to Acts 15, verses 28 and 29. 4 things that are required of Gentiles. You can do more if you want. Anybody can do it. You can keep Sukkot, but the 4 things that are required are don't eat blood, don't eat food sacrificed to idols, don't eat strangled animals, and don't commit sexual immorality. Those are the 4 things that are required of Gentiles. Okay, and they're right out of Leviticus 17 and 18, and they're in order, same order, which is really interesting. So I should do this as a class again. I've done it before here, but so he says, don't think I've come to destroy. Now, clearly, Jesus did not overthrow or throw down the law. From what Jesus says in the verses that follow Matthew 5, 17 to 20, he did not abolish the law, because he goes right from that into giving these 6 examples. And here they are. Here's how he exemplifies what he means by, I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill, or to show its full meaning. Well, you've heard that it said to those of old, you shall not murder. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of judgment. So did he lower the standard, or did he raise the standard? He didn't abolish it. He made it harder. You see the point? To say he threw out the law or replaced it, what he's really doing, he's saying, the real meaning of this law is, you better not hate people. That's the meaning of that law. You better not hate. Adultery. You've heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I say, if you look with a woman to lust, is he lowering the standard or is he raising the standard? He's saying, you want to know why there's a commandment that says don't commit adultery? Because it's in your heart. Get it out of your heart. He's not lowering the standard. He's raising it. Okay? Divorce. He doesn't lower the standard there at all. That's a whole lesson in and of itself, which is worth doing at some point. And it might, in some ways it's stricter, in other ways it's quite interesting. In fact, let me just in verse 32, but I say to you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason, except if there's sexual immorality, causes her to commit adultery. Why does he cause her? Because she's going to remarry. Why is she going to remarry? She was created for marriage. She wasn't given the gift of being celibate.